All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Inside Your Library. It's going to be a special one. We have Helen Gutierrez, who's really the keeper of all things collections for our library. But before we jump into that, I just want to say thank you to all of you. You're an amazing group of supporters, donors, advocates, your ambassadors, volunteers, general library lovers. And we just love having you here. So SPL is known for having an amazing collection, but one thing you may not know is that 1 out of 4 items in our collection is paid for through private support. And so that means more copies of things, different formats, and it also means going deeper into a subject area. So we are thankful for all the support that really makes this collection sing. We often talk about the dozens and dozens of programs that the library provides. But many of you came to us for the first time as donors because of your own use of collections. And we just feel like at the core of everything are the collections, whether it's music, books, movies, you name it. So before we jump into the program, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. And we know that Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish. The United States government promised hunting and fishing rights and a reservation to the Duwamish people in exchange for more than 54,000 acres of land. And that was a treaty signed back in 1855. So 150 plus years have passed, and the government's promises have never been honored. So we acknowledge that we continue to occupy Duwamish lands. So we are recording this today live, and just a couple things about Zoom to help in the conversation and participation. So first off, there is a chat window that you should be able to see. And so if you run into any technical issues, please use chat, and one of our amazing foundation teammates will be there to help. And then also, we're going to have an opportunity to talk with Helen at the end of the program. And so the question and answer button or little icon, that's really what you want to use to post questions. And we'll be monitoring those and try to answer as many as we possibly can before we're done with our time. So I think we want to jump right in, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our special guest, Helen Gutierrez. So Helen is, as I mentioned, the Library Collections Services Manager. And again, everything collection related. She oversees the purchasing and managing and curation of. And you'll learn more about her shortly. And today she's interviewed by our foundation board vice president, Justo Gonzalez. Justo's been on the board for 3 years now and came in on a leadership path, and we are excited to have him part of our work. So thank you once again for being here, and let's go ahead and start the program.
Well, hi, Helen. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and it's just a treat as a member of the Seattle Public Library Foundation Board to be able to talk to you.
Hi, Justo. I'm really happy that they put us together for this discussion. As you know, I'm the collection manager for the Seattle Public Library, which means that I lead the team that selects and acquires all of the books, movies, music, and other materials for our library system. And the other big part of my job is that I allocate and manage the library materials budget.
Well, I think that gives us a great jumping off point, and it would be, I think, helpful for a lot of our supporters to really understand exactly what collections mean. How is that defined by the library?
Collections is everything that you would go into the library looking for. They're the books, movies, music, whether they're physical materials or digital. We have streaming music, we have streaming movies. It includes books in many languages, and books for people of all ages, and movies and music of all different genres. We have magazines and newspapers. We just added a bunch of magazines to Flipster, our digital magazine service. So we have lots for adults, and we just added a bunch for children and teens titles too. We have things like Scientific American, We just added poets and writers and fine woodworking. And we added fine gardening recently because a patron requested it.
That's a great way for the library to respond to patron kind of requests. So how do you learn about new books to order for the library and determine the quantities needed?
There are 5 selection librarians who are on my team who report to me, and each one of them has an area of expertise. So for example, we have a lead children's selection librarian. And so she's always scanning the publishing landscape for what's the latest in children's material, for example. This week actually is an annual big event that happens every year for librarians that the publishing industry does. It's called LJ's Day of Dialogue, for Library Journals Day of Dialogue. And it's a full day of all of the publishers. That's when all the big books come out, is in the spring and the fall. And so we are going to be reviewing these titles, several months before they're even published. And we'll look at the print runs, we'll look at the size of the print runs. And so we know what's going to be heavily promoted. And there will even be author interviews. And then we'll place our orders for these books several months in advance, 3 to 6 months in advance. And then, as if patrons come across them pre-publication date and request them, that's kind of an indication, right? That the buzz is big enough that we might plan to order a few more titles when it gets closer to the time to place the titles. We're scanning the publishing landscape. We're tuning in to current events, what's happening in the news. And so each selector is paying attention for their areas.
That is fascinating. So how do current events affect the library selection of titles and sort of influence the composition of the collection?
Current events play a big role. During the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to check out books about how do you adopt a pet. During elections, the biographies of the candidates are coming out, right? Of course, the Black Lives Matter movement promoted heavy interest in very specific titles by specific authors. Ijoma Oluo, this is her latest book, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. This book is currently on our Peak Picks list. So you can go to your curbside branch and check it out. So you want to talk about race. Her first book came out last summer and was in great demand a year ago in June, almost a year ago in June. So it very much matters what's going on locally, regionally, globally. Climate change is big right now for books and film, documentaries. Current events really do affect what we're looking to acquire for the residents of Seattle, and in multiple formats, and as we can, in other languages.
That is great. You mentioned Peak Picks, and I think patrons are very interested to know how you came up with the idea of Peak Picks and how it was implemented at the library, because it is incredibly popular and it is a wonderful idea.
Well, thank you for asking, because it really is, I feel, our signature program at the Seattle Public Library, and I'm thrilled to have led the team that created Peak Picks. The library was interested because I had launched a similar program at 2 different library systems prior to my position here at the Seattle Public Library, and I knew that it was a priority when they hired me. That was clear even in my interview for this position. So we hit the pavement running as soon as I came on board, and my team, the behind the scenes book buyers and the public services team, all of the people that you see when you're out at your local branch and checking out books, it really took everyone, the marketing department, people from all throughout the library system worked on this team to create a program that was unique to Seattle, even though I had launched similar programs at other places, other library systems. We really needed a Seattle feel, right? Something that appealed to us. So Peak Picks isn't just bestsellers. It also has very much a local flavor. And speaking of flavor, there's always a cookbook, at least one that in the Peak Picks list. We have maybe 50 Peak Picks titles at a time. Here's one that's a Peak Pick right now, The Food of Oaxaca by Alejandro Ruiz. And I just, I say, check it out. And regional, we also do have a lot of emphasis on own voices. We're heavily influenced. Peak Picks is heavily influenced by own voices. And what that means is simply that when we choose a book, say by a Mexican-American author, or about the Mexican-American experience, it would be by a Mexican-American author, someone who lived that experience. That's what it means to be an own voice author. And so we do heavily look to provide exposure and access to books in own voices in Peak Picks.
That is a wonderful approach to that. And not to digress, but growing up in the late 70s and 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of exposure in public libraries of authors who were writing about their Mexican-American experience. And it wasn't really until the 90s, I think with Reign of Gold by Victor Villaseñor, for example, who wrote about his family's experience on his mother's side and his father's side. And it is a quintessential kind of Mexican-American experience that he described. It's one of my favorite books. I have my copy here. Here it is, Reign of Gold.
Oh, I love it, with the Virgen of Guadalupe on the cover.
It is. And well, that is my middle name. Not many people know that, Guadalupe. Because of the date I was born on is her saint day in Mexico. It's celebrated. It's always been a huge deal in my family. So to see the spread and the availability really in the collection of kind of own voice authors writing about their experience. Idioma is one of them, obviously. Victor Villaseñor. Don Miguel Ruiz is a Mexican author who writes about, the conceit there is that he is a Toltec shaman sharing the ancient kind of philosophy of the Toltec people. And we're big fans of philosophy in my household. In the last year, for example, and I'm going to lead into a question here just to give you our experience in the last year. Especially, we've had just a return to kind of first principle books. My kids really are big fans of the Ryan Halliday series on the Stoics. So I have here a copy of Stillness is the Key. This is his, the last of his 3 kind of books. Ego is the enemy and the obstacle is the way. And Halliday really makes kind of ancient Stoic philosophy. He connects it to our modern times in a very relatable way that even my 10 and 11-year-olds enjoy reading about. And for me, you can see my lawyer background on full display with my fully copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and On Solitude by Montaigne. These are books that I return to when I feel like I need a regrounding or to be anchored again. So I'm wondering, like, what books you have been reading lately, and what books kind of have a special place for you that ground you?
Well, I read everything, and I love magical realism. I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Love in the Time of Cholera is a book that is a big deal for me, and I revisit a lot. House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I really like her as an author. Because I read everything, and because I really like Mexican-American authors, of course, Luis Alberto Urrea is one of my favorite authors. He writes fiction, nonfiction, poetry. I read it all. I have here with me In Search of Snow one of his earlier novels. Nobody's Son, a memoir, his memoir growing up. He has a Mexican father and an Anglo mother, an American mother. And so he talks about that, being between Tijuana and San Diego, and his life. And his latest novel, House of Broken Angels, I highly recommend. And whatever Luis recommends, I also look to read. And he's recently recommended The Five Wounds, which is a peak pick by Kirsten Valdez Quaid. So that's on my to be read list. So with Luis, you get it all. With Luis Alberto Urrea, you get it all. That's a little bit about what I'm always reading and looking to read more of. But I read for comfort. I read for escape. I read for armchair travel and good health and information. I read a little bit of everything. Well, I love mysteries and setting too. And so when I lived in Seattle and I was missing the Sonoran Desert, I would read books set in the Sonoran Desert. And when I lived there and I needed water and coolness and green, I would read books set here.
Great. That is wonderful. There is, it's so funny. One of the peak picks, and this is going to ruin my credibility as a a bow tie wearing corporate lawyer. One of the picks was by a law school classmate of mine, Jasmine Guillory, who wrote The Wedding Date and The Proposal and subsequent books, and she's having a fabulous career. And I'm looking forward to her being able to travel again to Seattle and do readings.
There's at least one peak pick that would interest you, if not several. There should be several. And so rather than recommend a book, I'm going to recommend that you shop the Peak Picks menu at your curbside location, or go to our library website, spl.org, and Peak Picks, and you can see a list of all of the 50 or 60 current Peak Picks titles. Write down a bunch of them, and then go to your library and ask for a bunch of them. Take home a huge stack so that then you can sort through them and see which one feels right to you right now. And take the time. It's okay to check out a huge stack of books and take your time at home to decide which one is right for you today, and then return the others, and you can revisit them later if you want to. But explore. Rather than recommend a particular title, I recommend that you explore what's available right now. And I hope you have fun doing it.
Well, I think that is great advice. And that's it's advice that I hope folks take you up on and visit the website or go to curbside and see what's available. I love the idea of sort of going online, looking at their options, looking at Peak Picks. But what if you don't know? What if you don't know what you want to read right now?
It can be overwhelming. Right. Besides Peak Picks and just checking out a stack of Peak Picks and bringing them home and going through them until one resonates with you, your other option is to contact the library, because we have librarians. They're called readers advisors, readers advisors who will work for you to match you up with your next read. And it's called Your Next Five. So please reach out to librarians. We love to talk to you about what you might want to read next.
I will give a shout out to a book that was a surprise find that I found actually at the Central Branch, the Central Library, and it is called, the title is Empire of the Summer Moon. It's by S.C. Gwynn, who's a historian, and it's the story of Comanche chief Quanah Parker, the rise and fall of the Comanches, the most powerful Indian tribe in American history. It is a fascinating read, just because that history isn't told all that often. And being, on my mother's side, 100% Native American, it is a story that I think is powerful and deserves to be told. So it's Empire of the Summer Moon. If there's a specific recommendation, this is the one for me. It's different. It's out of my wheelhouse, but I just found it so engrossing. And as a fan of old American Western movies, part of the story of Quanah Parker and his mother was the inspiration for the famous John Wayne movie, The Searchers.
Oh.
But there have been various books written about that aspect of his mother's life, but this is the first book I came across that really explored his life, and it's absolutely amazing what the vast swath of what is now the United States that was actually the Comanche Empire, for lack of a better word.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to read that. I'm definitely going to read that. I'll make sure that we have enough copies at the library.
I wonder about that as a librarian, this idea of books being guilty pleasures, or certain genres of books being guilty pleasures, and that people are judged for what they're reading. Like, how does that, I don't know, have you ever put thought into that as a librarian, or that concept of books that are, as a genre or in general, appropriate to read, or some that you really shouldn't say out loud you're reading?
Well, I know that some people are embarrassed to read romance paperbacks, but I say you shouldn't be. I think it all counts. Some people are embarrassed. They don't count it reading for some reason to listen to an audiobook. It counts. It counts as reading. We all read for different reasons at different times in our lives. You need different stories, right? To soothe the soul, to comfort. We read for information. There's any time in your life, there's a book for that. But basically, for anything in your life, there's a book, there's a story, there's a poem. And why would you be ashamed of that? It's the full human experience. And books are our friends. They're my best friends. So there's no shame in anything you want to read. It all counts. It's all valid. Your experience with your book is valid. And it's nobody's business what you read. If you don't want to tell somebody what you're reading because you think they'll judge you, don't tell them. Tell them that's private.
I love that message. It needs to go viral. The power of books, I think, to connect people, even to themselves, right? I read a lot of philosophy, and I'm encouraging my kids to do the same, so that they learn how to connect with themselves,
Right.
and to understand their feelings. One day, when they're past the teenage years, they can better control them. But the ability of books to connect people, I think, through time, is one of the things that drew me to serving on the Library Foundation board. And something you said earlier, our conversation about kind of the immigrant experience, or the Mexican American experience in particular, just as an example. I remember I was a history major in undergrad, and I had an interest in history from the time I was a kid. The only books, that my parents, who did not get past middle or a primary level school in Mexico, where our family is from and where we're from, the only books that they purchased throughout the time I lived with them, through the time I went to college, was 2 sets of encyclopedias. And I don't think either of them ever opened a single volume, because they regarded those as the fountain of knowledge that their kids were going to absorb and turn into good grades, turn into a college degree and a career, and that in fact would happen with all 6 of us, their kids. Um,
Right.
but there is an image I remember from those encyclopedias, and it was from Jacob Riis's photo essay, How the Other Half Lives, from the 1880s. And I remember as a kid seeing in there a picture of a family, and they were living in a squalid tenement in the 1880s in New York. And the entire family, the father, the mother, and 4 little kids, were all engaged in their trade, which was rolling cigars. And I remember seeing the kids were barefoot, barely clothed, and they were very dirty. And as unusual as that may seem, that connected me very strongly to this American experience that we're all having, and even the issues we have today. And that, and the significance of that book, Jacob Riis's book, in exposing just the experience that immigrants were having in those days, and is just so powerful. Because that, I have no connection to Bohemia in Europe. I have no connection to the tobacco trade or cigar rolling, but I will never forget that image and the little boy, who's about the same age as my son is now, about 11 years old, it looks like, sitting on a chair, separating tobacco leaves so that his dad and his mom could roll them into cigars. Because that was my experience with my family's business. We were immigrants. We had an auto repair shop. And from the time I was a little boy, my job was to answer the phone and fix flat tires. And I think that's why I connected with that so strongly. So that is a personal story that connects me to I think, this country and this experience that we're having and the issues in the news now. So I just want to thank you for kind of prompting that connection, especially with our conversation about the books that you're reading now.
Well, speaking of cigar factories or cigar rolling, there's a pick right now of Women and Salt. It's a novel by Gabriela Garcia. And it is about generations of, it's a family story, an epic story of Cuban immigrants. And one of the characters in the book actually worked as a lectora, reader, in a cigar factory. That was basically the entertainment for the, as cigars were being rolled, as the workers were rolling cigars, they would be read novels. There's their job of the lectora or lectores, it could be male or female, and was to read novels or read the news. So they were actually very well educated, and it was also an educational experience because they were working for hours listening to the novels of the day and the news of the day, so I'm really interested to read this book of Women and Salt.
I'm writing that down now. So I think our supporters would love to hear some of the memories you have of libraries when you were growing up.
Well, today is May 4th, which is Star Wars Day. Many years ago, when I was young, Star Wars came out, and my father took us to the Cine Capri. My mother packed us lunch. We stood in line for hours, so long that my mother had to pack us lunch and to get into the movie and see Star Wars. And it was amazing. Of course, we all loved Star Wars. And what did I do right after seeing the movie? The next time we went to the library, which if it was summer, it was every day. And there were books at the library. There were Star Wars books at the library. So all of a sudden I was reading Star Wars stories too from the public library. My summers were spent with my sisters. Half the day was at the public pool, and the other half of the day was at the public library. And we watch films like Pippi Longstocking that that were based on books at the public library. We could check out anything they let us go. We weren't confined to the children's area. My parents very much supported reading. We too had the encyclopedia. Every year the encyclopedia salesman came to the house to sell us the new yearbook. But it was very important. Both of my parents are readers. And I mean, my mom read to raise us. She always had books about raising healthy children and vitamins and that type of thing. And my father was a big reader, is still, I mean, they both are still huge readers. And we were allowed to read anything at the house. The encyclopedias, we'd lay on the floor and read the encyclopedias. When my father got this huge gift of The Lord of the Rings, my mother bought my father this beautiful gift edition. It was like leather bound in a case, and it was red. The cover was red, and it was like jewel encrusted, fake jewels on the spine. I mean, it was just this like gorgeous, huge edition of The Lord of the Rings. And my dad, I asked him, could I read your book? Even though I was too young and I skipped all the war scenes, which is, half the book. But but my parents, nothing was off limits. It was great. My dad said, sure, you can read my book, Mija. And so it was very important to my parents that we read and enjoy reading, and they read to us every night. And we learned to enjoy books and reading from a very young age. So I'm just grateful to my parents for sharing books from a young age with me and my sisters, my siblings.
I'll just share, there was a really nice local branch library. I grew up in East Los Angeles. Was basically across the street from my family's business. So on the weekends, Saturdays, it was closed on Sunday, but on Saturdays, my parents would let me walk across the street through the walkaways to this library. And I have this memory of, there was this upstairs sort of balcony area that overlooked the stacks and the card catalogs. And that was the mixed media area where you could check out. You couldn't leave the building and check them out, but you could check out records. And there were these little photographs, and you could listen with headphones to records. And that is how I got my education in Richard Pryor. Not what my parents were hoping I'd be doing at the library.
No.
But I also spent hours and hours over a couple of year period listening to phonographs about diction and different accents. And so for a while, this kid from East LA with his East LA accent, who had sort of a mid-Atlantic accent once in a while. And I'm way out of practice. It came in really handy for theater throughout high school and college. But right now, in recent years, it's sort of a party trick that I use with my kids when we watch classic movies. So for example, Philadelphia Story, right? Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. I will anticipate the dialogue and give it in that typical American, mid-Atlantic American accent, and it just has the boys rolling on the floor.
I love it. That is so great. Downtown, for your next performance, your next audition, Justo, you can come to the downtown library, and we have an extensive play file and collection of monologues and plays that you can check out of the library.
That is so fun. I'm gonna write that down too.
For all of you theater lovers out there.
There are a lot, and we miss going to live theater. I wonder, since we're talking, we mentioned the kids in the children's section earlier. For years, every weekend, I had a standing date with my boys to take them down to the central library to the children's section. And then we would pick up holds, and then they would just spend, half an hour, 45 minutes just browsing the stacks and finding new books. They love the library, and when they learned that I would be talking to you today, they asked me if I would pass along their questions. Would that be okay?
That would be wonderful. I'd love to hear them. I hope I can answer them.
So Massimo, age 11, he asked, what is the most popular genre of books at the Seattle Public Library?
Massimo's smart. That's a good question. I don't really know. Everything's popular with the right person, right? With the right reader. And given that there's just a world of, everything's popular. What's popular with you, Massimo? I would ask you that. What's popular with you, and what do you want to read next? Definitely, I'd love to talk to you about what's popular with you now. And maybe we can find some more books that you will think are worth talking about and sharing and reading.
Well, I think you would have an earful of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and The War That Saved My Life.
Wow, at 11 years old.
Yeah. He and his brother are readers. So Tomas 10, he asked, what is the oldest book that you have acquired for the library's collection?
That's a great question. In terms of content, I would say that the oldest book is the Bible or the Quran. We have newer editions, of course, but in terms of content, we certainly have many different editions of the Bible, and that is referred to as the oldest book, I believe.
Very good. Thank you. I think they're going to get a kick out of this. So some of our supporters will remember that you were on KUOW's radio program Rewind with Bill Radke. Can you tell us about the program, your experience in it, and your part in it?
Well, many years ago, I was a reference librarian in the Fine and Performing Arts Department downtown at the Central Library. And back then, the library used to be open till 9 o'clock at night. So that's pretty late. It was 5 minutes to 9 one night. I was on the reference desk all by myself, and the phone rang 5 minutes before my shift was over. And it was a patron asking me for the lyrics to the song Froggy Went A-Courtin'. And I was like, all right. So I went and found a music book, a song book that had that song. And I opened it to the lyrics. I used the index or the table of contents. I located the song Froggy Went A-Courtin' for this patron. And I was so loopy and so ready to go home, kind of tired. I ended up singing off key. I don't really know how to sing. I sang very badly over the phone, the lyrics to this patron. And then I said, good night, we're closing, and, said goodbye. 2 weeks later, I was just working in the workroom behind the scenes at my desk, and my boss came into the workroom and asked to those of us in the room, did one of you sing a song to a patron a few weeks ago over the phone? Did one of you sing Froggy Went A-Courtin'? And I thought I was going to be in trouble. And I said, I admitted it was me. And I thought I was nervous to admit it, but I did. And she said, well, actually, that was Bill Radke from KUOW. And he would like you to be on his Saturday morning show, which is a satirical review of the week's news, little half-hour show. And so he ended up calling me at the beginning of the show. We simulated the quick information center that we have here, where you can call in and ask any question and we answer it. So at the beginning of the show, Bill would call me and ask me a question like, what is the definition of love? Or what's the origin of the phrase, a pig in a poke? Random questions. And then I would call back at the end of the show with the answer. I would research it. I would go and research it just like we would do on quick information. And then I would call back and answer it. So it was really fun. And we actually became nationally syndicated a couple years in. So people would call from all over the country, and we were picked up on the Armed Forces Network even. So people who were stationed on boats would call, people from the military. It was really interesting, and people had so many great questions. They had science questions and language questions, and it was very fun. So we did that for a few years, and I really enjoyed it. I loved working with Bill. He was very kind to me as the non-actor, the non-journalist. And it was great publicity for the library and for Quick, because we still have Quick information, and Ask a Librarian is basically part of that too. It's just an extension of that, is that we really are here to answer anything. No question is silly. No question is out of the question. No question is out of the question. Please call the library. We love to do this. We live for this. It's so fun.
I love that.
We learn so much.
No question is out of the question. I love it. So as a member of the board of the Library Foundation, I would love to ask, how important is foundation support for collections?
Foundation support is critical to the library collection, especially this last year during the closure due to the pandemic. The foundation has funded all different formats, lots of books. One critical piece of support last year in 2020 was the foundation allowed us to renew 5 databases that support genealogy research at the library, including like the New York Times historical. And we simply wouldn't have access to these databases if it weren't for the foundation. The foundation bought paperback books that, before we were able to start circulating books the normal way, where you check out a book with your library card, when we started to reopen last August, we were only able to check out paperback books on the honor system. And we call those uncats, or grab and go bags. And the foundation paid for a great number of those books, in addition to distributing them at our curbside locations during the pandemic closure. We also were able to, with foundation funds, provide thousands of paperbacks to at least 70 community partners. And so through community partners like El Centro de la Raza and the Chinese Information and Service Center, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the St. Mary's Food Bank, the Rainier Valley Food Bank, the Orion Center for Homeless Teens, all of these partners, those are just some of our partners who were able to distribute books to children and teens, thanks to support from the Seattle Public Library Foundation.
That is wonderful to hear, and it's why I became involved with the foundation a few years ago, and then ultimately joined the board. Just from my own experience, as an immigrant, the ESL, the language acquisition programming that the library offers to immigrant families in Seattle is something that I think needs to be supported and deserves support and expansion. That's a conversation, different conversation. But that's what drew me to the board and to support our wonderful library system. Are there any books that you would recommend that folks go out and borrow and read right now?
Another book that I just today thought it's time to reread this is Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions by Valeria Luiselli. I'm going to read the back of the book. It's an indictment of our treatment of undocumented children, a reckoning with our culpability for the dangers they are fleeing, and a damning confrontation between the ideals of the American dream and the reality of American racism and fear. Tell Me How It Ends is required reading for anyone concerned with human rights, human dignity, and our most fundamental responsibilities to each other. Luiselli's encounter with asylum seekers demands we see these children. What we do next is up to us. And basically, Valeria Luiselli is a Mexican who came to the United States and found herself, so the subtitle, an essay in 40 questions. 40 questions is the number of questions on the paperwork that has to be filled out for children seeking asylum. And I'm realizing all of a sudden you're an attorney and I'm talking to, so you know what I'm talking about. So in this little book, it's a very thin read. It's full of so much information and heart, and it's just essential reading, I think, for all of us right now.
Well, Helen, I've really loved our conversation today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Oh, Justo, me too. Thank you so much. This was great.
Well, welcome back. We're here again, and Helen is joining me. So thank you, Helen, and thank you, Justo. So first off, I've written on my little note here, the Oaxaca cookbook. I hope it's still in peak pics because I'm heading there after I'm done for the day. All right, Helen, you want to unmute, and we've got questions coming in, and we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. And so I'm going to just start at the top, okay? Because really interesting one. So first is from Jane, and she said she recently requested a book that was only offered as an e-option. I had this happen too just recently, which in her case, it doesn't work for her. And so does she need to anticipate or expect that a lot of the future books will be in e only versus on a traditional paper version?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there are some books that are only published in e and some books that are only published in print, traditional print. And I had interpreted the question also to be about our Suggest a Title service. And right now it is still that we are only able to accept title suggestions for digital books in the moment, but we are working on being able to accept again requests, title recommendations for physical formats as well, but we're still working on that.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily you're buying just one over the other. It's more a matter of if it's available and if we can fulfill that given where we're at in COVID. Gotcha.
Yes.
All right. So Carla said, you mentioned of your 5 staff, the selection librarians, you mentioned children's literature. What are the other 4? How do you divvy up the work?
We have a media selection librarian. So that's music and movies, the DVDs, the music CDs. And our media selection librarian also is involved with the digital services such as Canopy that is streaming movies, and Hoopla, which is music and TV shows, and yeah, movies, music, and TV shows as well. And then we have an adult nonfiction selection librarian, and an adult fiction selection librarian. And again, all formats. This includes your traditional print books, audio books, and the digital books, both ebook and e-audio books. And then we have a teen selection librarian, and who also primarily works with support for reviewing, evaluating, and keeping up with our database subscriptions. We have a lot of database subscriptions. I also have a team working who, two of those librarians spend part of their time also, and my assistant manager, working on selection of books in other languages other than English.
Gotcha. Okay, kind of related to this, Bruce asks that some of our neighboring library systems are considering reducing or even eliminating music CDs. Is SPL going to do this? And he certainly hopes you aren't.
Well, we don't have plans to do that right now. Seattle is known for its music scene. I think it's very important for the Seattle Public Library to continue to carry all formats, including physical formats, of as much music as possible. And there are many fewer music CDs, though, being produced. And so we can only acquire what is actually produced. And the pandemic did really slow that production down even more, really. So we are seeing many fewer CDs being produced.
Interesting. Let's see, let's go to another question. Are collections in each branch unique, and how much influence does the branch have on the collection development?
We're in constant communication with staff in the branches. As you saw in the discussion with Justo, creating peak picks, it was essential that we have team members and input from staff at all locations. So yes, I mean, but what we are centralized, I have one library materials budget, and we do centralized selection. So we want to make sure that all of our locations, all 27 of our locations, that includes the central library downtown, have access to a variety of titles, copies, and that we're distributing the collection as necessary regionally and to individual branches. So we are aware of programs going on. There might be a unique program going on that we might enhance the collection in a particular area to support that program. So there is a lot of discussion with each selector for their selection areas, and also with me at the management level. And so we're always communicating about the collection as a team, but the decisions and the final orders and the coordination centrally, because I do see it as one collection. We have one Seattle Public Library collection, and it's centralized for us to acquire it.
Related to that, I think with COVID and the new procedures of handling materials that came down from a national level and a state level, the libraries were basically converted into storage space for all the collection that needed to be quarantined. And so when you think about libraries and where all these books go when they're not out in circulation, the physical space of holding those books was really something to behold.
That's true.
It was something. So one of the questions we have is, what determines the number of ebooks that are available? And maybe you can talk a little bit about the dilemma with ebooks, e-audio books compared to traditional print.
It's a money-making industry. And so it's driven by what do the publishers think can sell. So, and who are they willing to sell to? So we do have some difficulties acquiring some titles in digital formats. For example, Amazon has the Audible exclusives, which are not available for sale to public libraries. And so as much as we'd like to offer certain titles to our patrons, we're simply unable to. So that's a lot of reason that is often a reason when somebody requests that we buy a digital audiobook in particular, that we're unable to acquire it for our patrons because the publisher will not sell it to us.
And is it still true that like an ebook costs about 6 times as much as a physical book, and an e-audiobook around 10 times as much?
I'd say an ebook is maybe twice, 2 to 3 times as much. So they're not quite that high of a markup. It does depend on the audience and the genre, subject matter, the publisher. But yes, always the digital edition is more expensive than the physical edition. And we may have to buy it several times because they expire. We might buy a license for a book for a year, and then it's still in demand, a title's still in demand, and it's still available to purchase, but it expired, the digital license expired, and so we have to buy it again. And so that's when it does actually become much more than 3 times the cost, right? Because they don't wear out like physical books do, but yet the models, the pricing models have been based on the pricing models for physical materials, and in some cases, and just to maximize profit for the companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the publishing industry is definitely going through changes, that's for sure. Carla asks, she loved hearing that the library is so responsive to user requests. So beyond requests, what does the library do to set criteria for picking books?
Well, we definitely are keeping up with current events, and what can we do to support school? What can we, at all ages, but especially K through 12, and we're scanning what's available, right? What is being published, and trying to match the interests. We can anticipate interests, certainly, right? And needs for our community. We anticipate children's books, forthcoming and perennial favorites. We anticipate the next in the series for adult mystery lovers, that type of thing. Nonfiction, we're always having to refresh certain like art books or or the play file, or computer books, social media books, how to get a job, what's the latest in how to create a resume, genealogy books. There's just an endless number of topics, subject areas that are very popular and that we're always refreshing. I'd say the most popular areas for adult nonfiction tend to be in the 600s, in the Dewey Decimal System, including the cookbooks. The cookbooks are there. And the 700s, which is more like the art type books, are also super popular. Drawing books, that type of thing. History is huge, so we're always looking to support those interests. So, we're each selector has their area of expertise and is really keeping current with where are there gaps in the collection that we need to fill in. We're listening to patron suggestions, and we're keeping current with what's available.
Gotcha. Okay, fun fact, as you're talking about 600s, 700s expanding, for those of you who know Central Library and that continuous Dewey Decimal run through the center of the spiral, basically, that's so parts of it can expand and parts of it can contract based on what's available. So, oh, Helen, thank you so much for being part of our donor world and doing your great work and just sharing so much of both yourself, Hugh and Justo both, but just the knowledge and your passion for what libraries are and what they do and how important they are. So, and
It's
for
been a
those,
pleasure.
oh, thank you, Helen. And I realize we're running at one, so I'm just going to finish with a few remarks just to say, again, thank you. And Justo, I think you're out there somewhere, though I can't see you, but I just want to say thank you as well. Again, all of you as donors, your support of the foundation and really the library are just a key piece of the work that we can do. And so things like curbside we mentioned, there's 600, almost 600,000 books and materials that were shared over the first quarter, and that's a 25% growth over last year. And almost 100,000 patrons downloaded 1 million ebooks and e-audiobooks in the first quarter. And again, double-digit growth over the prior year. And so your support is really quite critical to making sure we have this amazing collection. And I think that I hope you're all proud of what we were able to do. We've got a few hot days coming up here, and we have more library locations that have reopened, and certainly some are great for cooling spaces. Yesterday, Central opened along with 9 more branches, and there's a lot more coming. There are 50 positions that were cut from the budget. The library is working now to refill and replace, since we just secured some additional funding through the City Council and Mayor. So thank you both. And that's good news, because we'll get a little closer to having the library back to what we all know as normal. One last thing, we have another virtual event coming up in July. It's the State of the Library and Foundation. It's an event designed for all of you to actually help see the impact of your support and what it means to the library. Think of it as our report to donors, which you may have just gotten, bringing that report to life. And so we'll have our interim chief librarian, Tom Fay, part of the work. And we'll be focusing on some of the older adult programming that the library is doing thanks to donor support. So watch for an invitation. It'll come either through email or our e-news. And I guess just lastly, I want to say thank you so very much. You do make our library what it is, and we are grateful to you. And so with that, I hope you can get out, enjoy the weather, stay cool. And once again, thanks for being with us.